Welcome everyone. In today's video, we're going to talk about spirituality and the ASAM criteria. So I get asked a lot of questions by counselors when they are doing their biopsychosocial assessment with a client and the client mentions issues of spirituality, or maybe it's one of the questions that the counselor is asking during the assessment. The counselor wants to know, where do I put that information later when I'm writing up my ASAM summary? Which of the dimensions should I put it in? Or is there a specific dimension specifically for spiritual concerns? And so we will answer that question today, but it's also important to understand, why are we even talking about spirituality when we are doing our biopsychosocial assessment for substance use issues? And part of the reason has to do with the historical nature of our field growing out of the 12-step program, specifically Alcoholics Anonymous in the 1930s. And part of Alcoholics Anonymous and part of 12-step programs in general is identifying spirituality, identifying a higher power, and utilizing that higher power as you go through the 12 steps. And because our field grew strongly out of the 12-step tradition, it's still part of what we do to ask specific questions about spirituality and higher power. So that being said, there are non-spiritually based recovery programs. There are non-spiritually based recovery groups as well. So it may be that you're not too worried about where to document spirituality with some of your clients, but for some clients, it is an issue. So if you're wondering, where's the spirituality dimension in the ASAM? The answer is, it doesn't exist. So let's take a look at what the ASAM says about spirituality. On page 54, it says, a person's spirituality can be integrated within assessment and service planning across all 6 dimensions, rather than being addressed in a separate dimension. So that's page 54. So here's what they're saying, is that perhaps they considered making a separate spirituality dimension at one point. I don't know, but there is not a specific dimension for spirituality in the ASAM criteria. So what you will have to do as a counselor or a therapist or an assessor is to think about the context in which the information about spirituality came about during your interview, and thinking about, where does it make sense for me to put this information? So, for example, if a client is reporting emotional distress associated with their spirituality or associated with their lack of spirituality, then you might choose to put that in dimension 3, emotional behavioral cognitive conditions and complications, because you are clinically kind of tying it into this stress that they are expressing. And so that's why you're putting it into dimension 3. That makes perfect sense. Another person might decide that it would go into dimension 5, relapse potential, if a client is talking about having relapses and feeling like their lack of identification of their spirituality, their lack of participation with their spirituality, or their inability to identify a higher power. Maybe they say they think that might be a reason why they keep relapsing. Well, then you might choose to put that information into dimension 5, relapse potential. That is not to say specifically that if somebody does not identify a higher power, that you automatically say, well, dimension 5 has a problem, then they can't identify a higher power, they're going to relapse. That wouldn't really clinically be a prudent thing to say in dimension 5. We're really going to let the client drive where this information is coming from and where it's going into the dimension. So we want to be careful there not to make assumptions that this person's lack of spirituality is necessarily a problem either. If a client is talking about, for instance, that they are involved in a religious group, and they identify that this religious group and their activities feel very supportive and are really helpful to their recovery, then you might want to note that in Dimension 6, recovery environment. It might make sense to put it there. Or alternatively, if somebody is reporting that they feel their religious organization is oppressive and abusive, you might put that in Dimension 6 too, that perhaps they're experiencing some type of religious oppression or abuse. So you may be gleaning from this video that in your ASAM dimensions, you may have items that could be positive for recovery and also items that might make recovery more difficult. It is okay to include both strengths and needs in your ASAM summary. Some states do have specific requirements about making sure you put in strengths and needs in your ASAM dimensions, and particularly in your treatment planning. And so it might be useful to check out what your state requirements are, just so you know what you're supposed to be putting in there. Every state's a little bit different. So the important thing to take home here is that when you are doing your biopsychosocial assessment and you're talking about spirituality with your clients, be open to hearing their perspective and listening to almost where the client is categorizing it. Is the client talking more about the emotional, behavioral impact of their spirituality or lack of spirituality? Or are they talking about it as it's related to their relapsing? Or are they talking about it more as part of their recovery environment? And that may help you figure out where you want to put it within the 6 ASAM dimensions. Overall, it's just important that it's there somewhere if it's important to the client. So if I'm the next clinician inheriting your case, whether I read about their spiritual concerns in Dimension 3 or I read about them in Dimension 6, overall, it's just really important that I know those spiritual concerns exist. I hope this video was helpful for you and gave you some tips working with spirituality and the ASAM. Hit the like button and subscribe if you liked our video. And you can also check out our other videos on YouTube. You can check our website, pacificcrestclinical.com, to look at upcoming trainings and CEUs, as well as free clinical resources. Thank you.